If you're a project manager or a freelancer of any kind, tracking your time against projects is absolutely crucial. But honestly, the time tracking applications out there can just be straight up expensive or boring. So in just 30 minutes now, I'm going to teach you to create your own time tracking application from scratch on Coda. Here we go. Let's do it. All right, so let's start with our goal. Our goal is to create a timer like the one we have over here on the finish doc that essentially allows you to start, to stop, to pause, and to log. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some buttons. So let's kind of make our buttons now. So I'm going to say timer, and we're going to have a button, and we'll call this button start, and then we'll make another button. I'm using the / command to pull up these options for myself. You can also use insert here, but we'll call this stop. And next up, we'll make another one called pause. All right. So now that we have the buttons that are going to perform the actions, we need them to do something. We need them to be able to record information somewhere. The only places that you can record information really in Coda are controls. So that would be these. Notice how it says controls date. We can do controls time. We can do controls text. The other place you can record data with a button is in tables, and that's actually going to be a bit easier for this use case. So we're going to create a table called a timer. And we're going to allow these buttons here to insert or record information inside our column. We only need one, so we're going to make one table here. And now we need to be able to take these buttons and record here. The easiest way to do that is to refer to the table or refer to the actual row itself with a word and with the @ tag. So notice how there's this little bookmark here. This bookmark is the display column. It links to rows with the @ symbol and will display the column's value. So notice how I can say timer. Notice how there's a table timer, but there's also the row timer. This is the one we want, right? And let's call this value. And I can say, hey, right? So now with this timer, I can say something like equals @timer dot value. And it pulls out hey. So this is actually this display column, and calling this timer is how we're going to use these buttons to easily insert information into these columns. Since this is a timer table, we're going to need the time that we began at, time begun at. We're going to need the time the timer stopped, right? And we're also going to need one calculating the time spent. And then we're going to need a couple more columns that we'll go through later, but let's just deal with these right now. Time begun at, we can set column types. This is obviously going to be a date and a time, and stopped is also going to be a date and a time. All right, so let's just start with the start button. So the start button, what is it going to do? It is going to modify rows. You can allow your buttons to modify things like this, modify rows, and then you select a target. When you're just modifying a very specific row, I find this much easier to just reference that row. So I'm going to say, hey, modify rows @timer is the row that I want to modify. This is the start button, so we want to modify the time begun at, and we want to do it as now. There's a formula called now, which will give you down to the second. Notice with precision, you can set it to the minute, the hour, a day, but we don't want that. We want it by default, the time that is now. So let's do that. Boom. All right, so we have a start. You'll notice, let's press it, see if it works. Time begun at, boom, 10:42 a.m. It is 10:42 a.m. I can go like this, and now date time options, and I'm going to get time format and actually get the seconds as well. So notice this was 10:42 with 44 seconds. I can press that again, 10:43 in 0 seconds, 10:44 in 4 seconds. So the start button is starting a timer. It's logging the time that we press it. Stopped. Okay, so stop is going to be a little more fun. Stopped is going to be essentially, well, we just need to record the same thing. So we're going to say modify rows @timer. That's what we want to modify. When am I stopped to now? Same thing. All right, so let's go stop. Boom. All right, so now we have 10:43. Let's do this as well. It just helps us see. put it to the seconds. So now we're going to do time spent. Time spent is going to be stopped minus time begun at. So in Coda, these are date values, but date values are actually held as numbers. So you can perform operations, mathematical operations with time values. And this is just simply subtraction. So we're subtracting the time we stopped to the time we started. Boom, 31 seconds. Great. So that's recording the number of time. But what we actually want right now is this to be an actual timer, right? Because we want to create a timer on the screen like we have here. Notice how it's counting for us, 13 minutes, and it's counting live how much time is spent. So how do we get that done? What we're going to do is for time spent, we're going to actually give it a new formula. We are going to say if stopped is blank, right? So if stopped is blank, aka if the timer should still be running, what we want it to do is simply say now minus time begun at. If it is stopped, then we're simply going to do stopped minus time begun at. All right. So now, there we go. We have that stopped, but watch what happens if I erase that. If I erase the stopped, we can assume that the time has begun, but it has not stopped. Therefore, the timer is still running. So now we have a counting timer. So now you can use this to display on your canvas. You can say at timer.time spent. Spent active on timer, right? So now you have a counting timer that you can bring out anywhere into your doc. There's going to be a few more complex, wonderful things, because what we have to do now is we have to be able to stop this timer. Before we get to pause, there's something else we have to do, right? Because this is just a single row. We need to be able to log this time spent. There's no point in actually tracking how much time you've spent unless you're logging it over the long run, right? Because over the long run, you're going to get these awesome dashboards like this, at a glance, total time you spent across projects, across tags. In order to get this stuff, we need to actually log and save that information. So how you save information is going to be in a separate table. So let's make a new table. I'm going to press /table blank, and I'm going to call this DB for database, logged time, right? And on my DB log time, I'm going to have a couple different things. I'm going to have the start time, the stop time, and then I'm going to have the duration. Duration, how long I actually spent on something. All right, so what's going to happen now is we're going to create a button here called log time. This is going to take the information from this row and essentially shove it down into this table. So let's take this and make it a button. And what we're going to do is add a row to DB logged time. We're going to set the start, the stop, and the duration. We're going to set the start time as time begun at. We're going to set the stop time as stopped. And we're going to set the duration as stopped minus time begun at. Boom. All right, so you'll notice I press this log button. It logs it, and that's how much time I spent. We could do this again, right? We could change this to, let's delete this. Boom, stop, right? Now it's 4 minutes and 20 seconds. You'll see that that logs that and that saves it. But you obviously don't want to be pressing this. You don't want to press stop and then press log. We need to automate these actions so a lot of things are happening at one time. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go into our stop button. Let's make it red for funsies. And we're going to make this stop button record that time and press that log button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Command A to select it all, Command copy, and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to use a button called Run Actions. This allows a single button to perform multiple actions. So we're going to say, hey, first, what I want you to do is I want you to record the time this was stopped, and then I want you to run another action, which is logging that time, timer.log time, right? So now you can see, if I go like this, I'll press this button, and we expect it to fill this here, and we expect it to log one more time value here. So shaboom! Notice it did that for us, all in one action. One row added and one row modified. But there's more, right? Because when we stop, we expect to reset our timer. So now we need to make our button reset our timer as well. If you're starting to write longer formulas like this, you can press this expand button. So let's have this log our time as well. So this is run actions. I come back in. I say, notice how it says I'm on action 3. What's the third action I want it to do? I want it to modify rows again, and I want it to modify rows timer. I want it to do the time begun at, and I'm going to modify it to blank. Just putting quotations with nothing in it says like reset that value to a blank value. And then let's go stopped to blank, and we're good. We can auto format it. There's also, now we can add comments to our formulas too. So as we get, again, longer formulas, what you can do is you can double slash and you can say, stop the timer. So we're going to stop the timer, log the time spent, and then we're going to reset the timer itself, right? So this button is doing 3 things individually. So let's try that now, right? Let's reset this timer. Now we expect it to fill this, to log a time, and to reset this value. Here we go. Stop. Boom. Notice that we did all those 3 things. Okay, a couple more things that we're going to do now, right? Because you don't want to just blindly, we're going to make it a bit richer now, right? We don't want to just blindly track time. You want to track it against projects or clients if you're a freelancer, right? So what we're going to be able to do now is, first off, let's kind of put these in a row. Yeah, sure. Start, stop, pause. We'll get to pause later. Let's delete this, right? This is our timer. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add in additional selections for yourself. So let's make another table, and let's call this DB projects. Let's say you have project A, project B, and client A, and client C. All right? So this is going to be a selection, a table that allows us to track time against these things. So let's make a control. Again, the slash is how we insert everything into Coda. And I'm going to create one called a lookup or a relation. It's going to look up from projects, right? You only track one at a time, so I'm going to turn that off. And lastly, I'm going to name this something that's just easy for me to find. I like calling it a look because it's a lookup, and it's a lookup for projects. Great. Right, so now we can, boom, choose a project. But if we want to log this timer as towards that project itself, we need to find a place to keep that value, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a project column here. I'm going to create a column type, a relation or a lookup, and we're going to call it DB projects. We don't want to do multiple. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say this is called a project. We're going to start this timer. We're going to add more to this. We want it to also modify project to look projects. Notice how I can find what I just named that lookup. All right. Which means when I stop it, I also want to reset that value. It's actually not that important, but it's always good to just cover your bases, make sure everything's being reset. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to say project is back to a reset. All right. Great. So now I can, start tracking time against project B. And then I need to ensure that that project gets logged in my log time. Project, same thing, column type, relation, DB projects. And lastly, we're going to make sure this button, I press equals to open up the editor. I'm saying, hey, in the project, can you do project? Notice this says this row.project, right? That's what I want, this row.project. Boom. Okay, so now if I stop, I should expect it to stop the time, log the time down here with the project, and reset the values. Stop. Boom. Reset. Logged this much time against project B. Perfect. We are well on our way. Okay, a couple more things that we want this button to do as well, right? Because you just tracked against project B. You want to think about your end user. You're probably going to track a new project. If you're stopping a timer for a certain project, it's probably because you're ready to begin something new. So I'm going to go back into here, and I'm actually going to go, and I'm going to say, hey, do one more action. The action I want you to do is to reset my controls to defaults. So that's easy to do. We're going to use the reset control value, and I'm going to relook projects. Great. All right, so I can notice I can start for project B. I'm tracking, and we should expect this now to stop it, to log it, to wipe it, and to reset this value right here. Let's put this in a little call out. Select. Great. All right. Boom. So stop, and notice that it reset that. Now I'm ready to go for a new one. All right. The next part, and if you're ready to get into some sweet Coda stuff that's pretty technical, this is your goal. Remember, if you just want to grab this template fully built out, you don't really care how it was made, and you want to be able to use it, you can do that in the comments below. But I'm going to get into some more technical Coda pieces now with this pause button. So here we go. Next up, we want to be able to pause, right? Maybe you're working on a project and you get a phone call, okay? We are going to pause this thing. So what we're actually going to do is we aren't going to add an extra column here, right? Because if we add an extra column here on our timer, we can't pause multiple times. You may want to pause and start and pause and start and pause and start. Anytime you want to do something multiple times or a variable number of times, that means you need a table for it, right? Because you need rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new table, and it's going to be called the pauses logged. All right? And what I'm going to do with these pausing logs is I'm going to come here and I'm going to say, what time did the pause start? What time did the pause stop? And what time was the pause duration, right? Okay, so let's keep going here. What we want this pause button to do then is to log when we started or stopped this. So I'm going to add a row to pause logs, and I'm going to set pause start is equal to now. And boom, that'll start a pause, right? Let's watch it. Pause. Okay, now we need to be able to actually stop this thing. Okay, so here we go. So now we need to be able to enter into pause stop. But imagine that there's multiple pauses in here, right? We actually need to be able to locate which pause we want to stop. So let's say that this was a date time value, and we're going to say the pause stopped at 3:14 at 11 a.m., right? So now we have a pause duration. We're going to say pause stop minus pause start. Okay, so let's say we pause for 25 minutes. We want to be able to modify this row and this row specifically, right? Even if there's a ton of them. This is the most current time that it's been paused. How are we going to do that? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn this into, here we go, into this. And what we're going to do is I am going to copy this. And I'm going to write something. Here we go. I'm going to say with name. With name is a way to create a longer formula and then refer to that thing multiple times without having to rewrite it. So I'm going to rewrite a formula that calls pause logs dot filter. So go look in the pause table, and I want you to find certain rows. The rows I want you to find is where the pause start dot is not blank, and the pause stop dot is blank. Okay? And I want you to find the first one of those. Okay, so go and look in that row and find out where, hopefully that doesn't delete. Let's copy it. We'll look at this real fast. All right, so go in here and look where this is not blank and this is blank. Obviously, the only row that reaches that criteria is this row. So it's going to find that row. We're going to now name this the row to pause, right? So now we give it a name, and I'm going to call it the row to pause. Now I can refer to this anywhere. And I'm going to say if the row to pause dot count is equal to 0. If there's no rows that I actively need to pause, I'm going to actually add row. So this is a new one. Oops. What I'm going to do is add a row to pause log, pause start now. Boom. If it's not, aka there is one that I need to do, then I'm going to modify rows. The row I want to modify is the row to pause. The pause stop is to now. All right? So there we go. That's what's going on. We can look in that in just a sec, but let's see. This is going to allow us both to pause and to resume. For example, I have on here, I'm working on YouTube right now. Obviously, I'm working on YouTube. I'm going to pause this. Notice how it pauses that actually. And then now the next time I press this button, it's going to resume that. Boom, resume. 28 minutes and 7 seconds, right? So I can pause this as many times as I like. And then I can resume. So that's what this if longer formula is allowing us to do. It's basically saying, hey, if there is a row to pause, if there's not a row to pause, if the count is equal to 0, start a new paused session. If there is one, that means that a pause session is active, and therefore let's modify it and stop it. Okay, so let's see if that works. Pause. Boom. There we go. Watch. So now what we should expect is we should be able to pause it, start a pause log, and then we'll be able to stop that pause log. We can start a pause log and stop that pause log. Okay? But we still haven't added this to the timer. We haven't related this. Information is completely separate from this timer itself. And so what we're going to do is, now we have to kind of relate these things, right? So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, well, how long did I pause for? Actually, first, let's make this button label different. We can turn this into a formula and we can say if pause log dot filter, the same thing, looking, is there a row to pause? Where pause start dot is not blank and pause stop dot is blank, dot count is equal to 0. Then if there's nothing I need to stop, then I'm going to say pause. And if not, I'm going to say resume. Right? All right. So now I can say pause and now it says resume. Right? So now I've logged these. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into here and I'm going to say equals to pause logged dot pause duration dot sum. And this is going to be my total pause time. Okay, I can name formulas and come back to them later. So this is my total time that I've paused. And so now when I go here, I'm going to come and I'm going to relate this back to my actual timer. Okay, so the total time is blah, 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 blah. Okay, so stopped. Here we go. All right, let's say I start something. Okay, and now stopped is actually going to be, time spent is stopped minus time begun at minus total pause time, right? Because what that allows us to do is subtract the total time that has elapsed from when you press start to when you press stop, subtract the total paused time, okay? Yep. All right. So next up, there's a couple things that we can do to make this a little friendlier. How did I get this, right? Because how did I get this to pause as well? What I did in this formula is I essentially said, hey, okay, if the time spent is blank, italicize and say select project and start timer. So you'll see here, if I stop this, it would just say, hey, time to start your timer. But then I'm going in here and I'm kind of defining, okay, if a timer is going, so I'm saying if a timer is currently going, then I'm going to find out paused row, same thing, pause logs.filter, right? So I basically find that and I say, if there is a current paused timer, right? If it's greater than 0, if the rows that I look for is greater than 0, then what am I going to do? I'm going to show the paused row. So I'm going to go find that paused row, and I'm going to take its logged stop minus the pause timer. If not, I'm going to take my total time spent. Otherwise, take total time spent and subtract my pause total. Great. Okay, so that's what we're doing, right? So that just, again, this isn't necessary, that piece. It just allows you for the user interface to kind of give them a really beautiful, pretty user interface. So that allows us to pause and do that. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to log this time. So let's go here, db log time. This is our last piece, and then you're essentially done with your advanced timer. You're going to say paused time. So then what I'm going to do is when I stop it, when I log it, I actually want to go here and take this and make pause time to equal to total pause time. Boom. Ba-doop, boop, 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 boop. So that's going to log the pause time there. The duration is going to be there. The duration is going to be, let's make sure it's not factoring in that piece. Stopped minus time begun at. Yep, that's the total duration. So we'll call this total elapsed time. And then we're going to call this one actually time spent working, right? Because now we need to take the total elapsed time and take it away from what we stopped. So do that, time spent working. So if that's my total elapsed time, then we're going to go in here and we're going to say total elapsed time minus pause time. Yeah, that'll work. But last thing, right, these didn't reset, so we need to make sure that this stop button also does one more thing. We want it to also delete rows, pause logged. Boom, okay. So let's go and reset everything and see if we can make this work now. So I'm going to say I want track time against project, client A. We're timing. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to pause our timer. So we're going to get a cup of coffee. Let's resume working. All right, so I paused for 8 seconds. So what we're going to assume is that, well, let's see if it works, okay? All right, client A, boom. All right, everything's reset. That's ready to go again. Now I paused here. I worked for 24 seconds total. That's from start to stop. I worked for client A. I paused for 8 seconds, which means I actually worked for 16 seconds. So you have everything you need to be able to build an advanced timing application. This is the structure for an advanced timing application in Coda. If you don't want to kind of build out all the beautiful pieces yourself that allow you to pull out the data and you just want this template, you can grab it in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. Adios.